Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging headfirst into Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene.
Yeah, a landmark book.
Absolutely. It throws such a fascinating light on, well, the basics of biology, and especially that relationship between altruism and selfishness. It can be pretty puzzling. And you wanted to get a solid handle on these core biological ideas. That's our mission today, really, to unpack Dawkins' perspective, which was pretty revolutionary at the time.
Definitely stirred things up.
Yeah, see why it caused such a stir, pull out the surprising stuff, and, try not to get totally bogged down in jargon.
Right. We'll be looking at various bits from the book, different editions, key chapters on genes, aggression, kin selection, cooperation, even memes.
Yes, memes. We'll get to those.
The idea is to really extract the key insights, maybe clear up some common misunderstandings.
There are a few of those, aren't there?
There are. And just show you how, well, kind of game-changing this gene-centered view of evolution really is.
Okay, great. So let's dive right in. The big question, the one that's always sort of humming in the background in evolutionary biology is, what's actually being selected? What is natural selection acting on?
Exactly. Is it the species? Survival of the fittest species?
Or maybe groups within a species, like the most cooperative pack.
Or is it the individual organism, the strongest, fastest, smartest one?
Or is it something else entirely?
And that's where Dawkins, building on earlier work, really focuses things. He argues pretty strongly that the fundamental unit of selection, the thing that natural selection really operates on, is the gene.
The gene itself, which sounds, well, a bit weird at first, doesn't it?
It does, because we're used to thinking about evolution in terms of whole organisms. Individuals surviving, reproducing, passing on their traits.
Right, like you see a bird making a loud call when a hawk flies over. Seems like it's warning the flock, even though it draws attention to itself.
Looks like altruism for the group.
Or a salmon battling upstream, spawning, and then dying. That feels like it's all about continuing the species, surely.
These are exactly the kind of observations that Dawkins wanted to re-examine through this different lens. He'd say, yes, we see altruism at the individual level, maybe even group benefits sometimes, but the ultimate driving force, the reason that trait exists and persists, is because it benefits the underlying genes.
How does that work, like with the alarm call?
Well, a gene that prompts an organism to, say, warn its relatives might actually increase its own chances of survival in the gene pool. Because those relatives...
They carry copies of the same gene.
Exactly. So the bird takes a small risk, maybe. But if that saves its siblings or parents, who share on average 50% of its genes, then the alarm call gene effectively promotes copies of itself.
So it's not about the bird deciding to be selfless, it's about the gene's success rate.
Precisely. And this is crucial. Dawkins uses a behavioral definition of altruism and selfishness. It's not about motives or feelings.
Okay. So what's the definition then?
An act is altruistic if it lowers the survival prospects of the actor.
The one doing the action.
Yes. And raises the survival prospects of the beneficiary. And selfishness is just the opposite. Helps the actor, harms another. It's purely about the effects of the behavior.
Got it. That reminds me of that Necker cube analogy he uses.
Ah, yes. Good one.
It's that simple line drawing, but your brain can flip it, see it facing one way or the other. And he says the gene's eye view isn't like a whole new theory that contradicts Darwinism.
No, not at all. It's still neo-Darwinism.
It's just a different way of seeing the same picture, a different perspective, maybe a more revealing one sometimes.
That's such a key point. It helps explain things that the older idea of group selection, creatures doing things for the good of the species, really struggles with.
Yeah, because if everyone else is being helpful for the group, what stops a cheater?
Exactly. Why wouldn't a selfish individual who, say, benefits from the alarm calls, but never makes one itself, why wouldn't that individual thrive and pass on its shooting genes?
And eventually the whole group altruism thing would just collapse, wouldn't it?
That's the problem. Group selection is generally seen as a much weaker force than individual or gene-level selection, and Dawkins points out how absurd the "for the good of" logic gets if you push it.
Like what?
Like, should lions avoid eating antelopes for the good of the mammals? Or maybe for the good of the vertebrates? Where do you draw the line? It doesn't hold up.
Right. The gene's perspective seems much more consistent there. It's focused on its own survival and replication. Okay, so genes are the key players. But what exactly is a gene in this context? It's not just like one little bit of DNA coding for one specific protein, is it?
Not necessarily, no. Dawkins defines it more functionally as a replicator. It's any chunk of genetic material that's potentially long-lived enough, copies itself accurately enough, high fidelity, and is common enough fecundity to serve as a unit of natural selection.
So longevity, fidelity, fecundity.
Those are the key properties of a successful replicator. Think of it like a unit that can persist potentially for millions of years, making copies of itself as it travels down through generations, hopping from body to body.
Bodies being the survival machine.
Exactly. That's his term for organisms like us. Temporary vehicles built by genes to house and propagate themselves.
It's a striking image. And these genes, they don't work alone inside these machines, do they?
Oh, absolutely not. They're incredibly gregarious, as he puts it. Building a body is a massive cooperative venture involving thousands, tens of thousands of genes working together.
Like a huge team project.
Yeah, genes influence each other's effects in complex ways. A single gene often only has a meaningful effect in the context of all the other genes present. Natural selection favors genes that are good team players, ones that cooperate effectively with the other genes likely to be found in the same gene pool.
Because a gene that disrupts the whole process won't build a very successful survival machine.
Precisely. So while the individual body is mortal, the genes, through their copies, have this potential for, well, near immortality.
This gene focus raises some odd questions, though, like sex. Why bother with sexual reproduction?
The paradox of sex.
Yeah, from an individual gene's perspective, passing on only 50% of your genes seems inefficient. Why not just clone yourself, pass on 100%?
It's one of the biggest, thorniest questions in evolutionary biology, and Dawkins acknowledges that in the book. There's no simple, universally agreed answer presented there.
Okay.
Most explanations involve complex ideas about generating variation to fight off parasites or adapt to changing environments, but it's definitely a puzzle from a purely selfish gene viewpoint initially.
And what about all that DNA that doesn't seem to code for anything? So-called junk DNA. That seems wasteful for the organism.
But maybe not for the gene itself. Dawkins suggests some of this surplus DNA might just be successful at replicating itself within the genome, like a harmless parasite or a hitchhiker.
Just along for the ride.
Yeah. Its purpose, from its own perspective, is just to get copied. If it doesn't harm the survival machine too much, it can persist.
Okay, so genes build the survival machines, our bodies and brains. They set the sort of long-term strategy, but we make the decisions day to day. Our brains do. How does that work?
Think of it like this. Genes are the policy makers. They dictate the blueprints, how the machine is built, including the nervous system and brain.
The hardware and the basic operating system?
Kinda, yeah, but they operate on a very slow timescale evolutionary time. They can't directly control moment-to-moment behavior because there's a time lag.
Right. By the time the gene's influence could directly cause an action, the situation might have completely changed.
Exactly. Dawkins uses that great analogy of programmers on a distant star sending instructions to a chess computer on Earth. They can build a great computer, program it with rules and strategies, but they can't dictate individual moves in real time.
So the brain is the chess computer, the executive.
Yes. It uses learning, memory, simulation, our ability to imagine outcomes, to make the rapid, tactical decisions needed for survival in a complex, changing world.
So the genes provide the general rules, the capacity to learn, maybe some predispositions.
Predispositions, general strategies, algorithms for survival. But the brain executes the plan based on immediate input.
So our ability to mentally play out scenarios, what if I do this? That's a key part of how the survival machine operates.
Absolutely. Simulation lets us try out strategies vicariously, without the real-world risks. It's a powerful tool built by genes, but operated by the brain.
Okay. So for a specific behavior to evolve, say, like those hygienic bees Rothenbuehler studied, the ones that uncap cells and remove diseased larvae.
Classic example.
There needs to be a gene, or maybe a set of genes, that influences the bee's nervous system to make that behavior more likely.
That's the idea. Rothenbuehler's work suggested it might involve multiple genes, even recessive ones, controlling different parts of the sequence, uncapping, removing. It shows how genes can influence quite specific actions.
And if bees with those genes leave more descendants because their hives are healthier,
then those genes become more common in the gene pool. It doesn't matter if the behavior looks altruistic, helping the hive, or selfish. It just has to result in the underlying genes replicating more successfully.
Okay. What about communication then? Birdsong, bee dances, alarm calls? How does the selfish gene view explain those?
Fundamentally, communication is seen as one survival machine influencing the behavior or nervous system of another.
Influencing. Does that mean it's always honest?
Good question. Not necessarily. While many signals are mutually beneficial, like a bee dance, accurately guiding others to nectar, benefiting the dancer's relatives and the hive,
Which helps her genes.
right, or an alarm call, warning kin, there's also scope for manipulation and deception.
Like a bird faking a broken wing to lure a predator away from its nest.
Perfect example. That's clearly transmitting false information to manipulate the predator's behavior. The selfish gene framework absolutely allows for and even predicts deception when it serves the gene's interests.
Which brings us neatly to aggression and competition. If survival machines are vehicles for selfish genes,
Then other survival machines become part of the environment. They can be obstacles, competitors for resources.
or even resources themselves.
Or resources, yes. And competition is often most intense with members of your own species because you need the same food, the same territories, the same potential mates.
Makes sense. But animals don't just fight to the death all the time, do they? There seems to be a lot of ritual and restraint. Dawkins talks about the gloved fist.
Yeah, outright lethal aggression carries risks for the attacker too. Injury, wasted energy, plus killing a rival might even indirectly help other rivals by removing competition for them.
So it's not always the best strategy for the genes.
Often not. This is where the idea of evolutionarily stable strategies, or ESS, comes in, developed by John Maynard Smith.
ESS, what's that basically?
It's a strategy that, if most members of a population adopt it, cannot be bettered by any other strategy. It's stable against invasion by alternatives.
like a rule everyone follows because deviating doesn't pay off.
Exactly. Simple conditional strategies often become ESSs. Like, if you're the resident in a territory, attack. If you're the intruder, retreat. If everyone follows that, it avoids costly fights most of the time.
So stability emerges from individual self-interest, essentially.
That's the idea. It can look like cooperation or group benefit, but it can arise purely from gene-level selection, favoring strategies that work well against the other strategies currently common in the population.
Like that rowing team analogy he uses.
Yeah, where selection might favor rowers who speak the same language, not because language itself makes them better rowers, but because communication within the boat is smoother.
So compatibility between genes gets selected for even if they aren't physically linked,
Okay.
giving an impression of higher level selection.
Precisely. It's a subtle but powerful point.
Okay, now let's get to one of the most famous parts, kin selection, helping your relatives. How does the selfish gene explain that? Seems obviously altruistic.
Well, it's altruistic at the individual level, maybe. But from the gene's perspective, it's about helping copies of itself that happen to reside in other bodies.
Because relatives share genes.
Exactly. It's based on relatedness, the probability you share a specific gene with a relative. You share, on average, half your genes with a parent or sibling, a quarter with a grandparent or grandchild, an eighth with a cousin.
Right. Identical twins share 100%, technically.
Correct. So a gene that promotes behavior that helps a relative survive and reproduce, even at some cost to the individual actor, can actually increase its own frequency in the gene pool. If the benefit to the relative, weighted by the degree of relatedness, outweighs the cost to the actor.
Hamilton's rule, basically.
That's the mathematical expression of it, yes. So kin selection isn't some special case of group selection. Dawkins argues it's a direct consequence of gene selection. It's genes helping copies of themselves. He even calls it genesmanship sometimes.
Genesmanship. I like that.
It captures the idea.
But surely animals aren't doing these calculations. That's my cousin, relatedness 1/8.
No, of course not. Evolution doesn't work through conscious calculation. It favors simple rules of thumb that, on average, lead to behavior that benefits kin.
Like what?
Like, be nice to individuals you grew up with, or care for any small creatures squawking in your nest. These rules usually result in helping relatives, but they can be exploited.
Like the cuckoo.
Exactly. The cuckoo exploits the host parent's rule. Care for the chick in my nest. It's a misfiring of an instinct that's usually adaptive,
And there's always that certainty issue, isn't there? You're 100% related to yourself.
which provides a fundamental baseline of selfishness selection. Selection strongly favors your own survival. And mothers are usually more certain of their maternity than fathers are of their paternity.
Which can lead to differences in parental investment.
It can. And asymmetries even down to grandparents, maternal grandmothers might be predicted to invest more than paternal grandfathers based on certainty links.
Fascinating. This connects to family planning too, doesn't it? Clutch size in birds, for example.
Yes. There was an older idea, mainly from Wynne Edwards, that animals limit their birth rates for the good of the group to prevent overpopulation. Classic group selection thinking.
But Dawkins, following David Lack, offers a gene-level explanation.
Right. Lack argued individuals choose a clutch size that maximizes the number of their own offspring that survive to reproduce.
Not the total number laid, but the number that actually make it.
Exactly. Laying too many eggs might stretch resources too thin, meaning fewer, or even none survive, compared to laying a slightly smaller number. It's an optimization problem for the parent's genes.
A selfish calculation again, really? Maximizing gene transmission.
Pretty much. And individuals might adjust that number based on current conditions, food availability, population density, their own condition. It's flexible, but driven by maximizing surviving offspring.
This seems to set up potential conflict, though, between parents and offspring.
The battle of the generations, yes. Because parental interests and offspring interests don't perfectly align.
How so? A parent wants all their kids to survive, right?
Yes, but they're equally related to all of them, usually 50%. Each individual offspring, however, is 100% related to itself, but only 50% related to its full siblings.
So from my perspective as a baby bird, I am twice as important as my brother or sister in the nest.
Genetically speaking, yes. So you might be selected to demand more than your fair share of parental resources, even if it slightly disadvantages your siblings, up to a certain point.
This is where parental investment, PI, comes in. Triver's idea.
Exactly. PI is any investment, like feeding, guarding, in one offspring that reduces the parent's ability to invest in other offspring, present or future. Offspring will likely be selected to demand more PI than the parent is initially selected to give.
So there's a built-in conflict zone. The offspring tries to extract more. The parent resists giving too much to one at the expense of others.
It's a subtle evolutionary tug of war. Think about weaning conflict, or even how parents might deal with runts in a litter. Sometimes abandoning them might be the best strategy for the parent's overall reproductive success if resources are scarce.
Hedging their bets.
Kind of. And Dawkins stresses, again, when he talks about offspring cheating or parents being vigilant, it's not moral judgment.
It's just the language describing behaviors favored by selection because they benefit the underlying genes.
Precisely. He explicitly says we need to teach altruism and generosity because they don't necessarily come naturally from this gene-level process.
Okay. So related to the battle of generations is the battle of the sexes. What's the core issue there from a gene perspective?
It boils down to the fundamental difference in gamete size. Sex cells.
Sperm versus eggs.
Right. Males produce millions of tiny, cheap sperm. Females produce far fewer, large, nutrient-rich, expensive eggs.
That initial investment difference is key.
Hugely key. The female invests more right from conception. This makes her, in a sense, more committed to that particular offspring early on. It creates an asymmetry.
And that opens the door for exploitation.
Potentially, yes. From the male gene's perspective, there might be less incentive for paternal care and more incentive to seek further matings, leaving the female holding the baby, so to speak. The larger initial investment makes the female more vulnerable to desertion.
So things like courtship feeding, where the male brings food, that could be seen as trying to equalize the initial investment a bit.
That's one interpretation, yes, reducing the initial disparity. And from this core asymmetry, you see different strategies evolving. Females might favor domestic bliss, looking for signs of fidelity and parental investment in a mate.
While males might lean towards a he-man strategy, proving genetic quality through displays, even if they won't stick around.
Those are two ends of the spectrum, yeah. And it helps explain common differences in appearance. Males often being gaudier, females drabber. Males are competing for scarce female investment. Females need to survive to raise the young. Males are often the high-risk, high-reward gamblers in the reproductive game.
Okay, let's switch to cooperation. Why live in groups at all if everyone's fundamentally selfish? We touched on the selfish herd.
Right. Hamilton's idea that grouping up reduces your personal risk of being nabbed by a predator. You're just trying to put other bodies between you and danger. It's selfish aggregation.
But what about things that look more actively cooperative? Like those gazelles doing the stotting jumps. Looks risky.
Yeah, the function of stotting is debated. Is it an altruistic warning to others? Is it telling the predator, I see you? Or is it, as some suggest, an honest signal of fitness to the predator? Look how high I can jump, don't bother chasing me, chase someone else.
So it could still be fundamentally selfish, advertising individual quality.
It could be, but genuine cooperation does evolve too. Reciprocal altruism.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. How does that fit the selfish gene?
It can work if individuals interact repeatedly, can recognize each other and remember past behavior. If I help you today and you're likely to help me tomorrow, then cooperation benefits both our sets of genes in the long run.
But what stops cheating? Someone takes the help but never gives it back.
That's where strategies like the grudgers come in. Cooperate initially, but if someone cheats you, you remember and refuse to help them again. This can be an ESS, resisting invasion by pure cheats or unconditional altruists, suckers.
So memory and repeated interaction are key.
Very key. And nature often provides these conditions, allowing for mutual benefit like cleaner fish and their clients, or even ant-aphid relationships.
Right. Now, memes. This was a big idea introduced towards the end of the first edition. Cultural replicator.
Oh, a fascinating extension. Dawkins proposed that culture evolves in a way analogous to biological evolution, but with a different kind of replicator, the meme.
Which is like an idea, a tune, a fashion, a skill.
Exactly, a unit of cultural transmission spread by imitation.
Right.
Like genes, memes can be said to have longevity, an old idea. Fecundity, that gets you to and spreads fast.
Yeah.
And copying fidelity, how accurately it's copied.
Though meme copying seems much less precise than gene copying, doesn't it? Ideas change as they spread.
Absolutely. They mutate, they blend. It's not a perfect analogy, but the core idea is that these cultural units replicate themselves, spreading through human brains and behavior.
And they can be selfish, too. They spread because they're good at spreading, not necessarily because they're good for the people holding them.
That's the radical part. A meme like celibacy, for instance. It's terrible for the genes of the person practicing it, but the meme itself can be highly successful within certain cultural contexts, like religious orders.
So memes can even be in conflict with genes.
They can. Dawkins suggests blind faith is a particularly powerful meme trick. It discourages questioning, making it more stable and easier to propagate. Our brains become vehicles for memes, just as our bodies are vehicles for genes.
Wow. Okay, jumping back to cooperation for a moment, Dawkins later wrote about Axelrod's Prisoner's Dilemma tournaments.
Yes, in later editions, and Nice Guys Finish First. Really important work.
The Prisoner's Dilemma. That's the game where two players can either cooperate or defect. And individually, defecting seems like the best option. But if both defect, they do worse than if both cooperate.
Right. It seems to model the problem of achieving cooperation among self-interested individuals.
And Axelrod ran these computer tournaments where different strategies played against each other. And the winner was, surprisingly,
tit for tat. A very simple, nice strategy.
What were its rules again?
Start by cooperating. Then just do whatever the other player did on the previous move. So it retaliates immediately against defection. But it's also forgiving if the other player switches back to cooperation. It cooperates too. And crucially, it's not envious. It's not trying to score more than the opponent. Just do well for itself.
And this simple, nice, but retaliatory strategy won.
It did incredibly well against much more complex and devious strategies. It showed that cooperation can emerge and thrive, especially in situations with repeated interactions. Iterated Prisoner's Dilemma.
That seems quite hopeful, actually.
It is. It suggests that being nice, not defecting first, retaliatory, forgiving, and clear can be very successful evolutionary strategy, not just in games, but potentially in real-world scenarios too. Wage bargaining, international relations.
That Bristol-Coventry football match example where they realized cooperating gave them both a better chance than competing fiercely.
Exactly. Shifting from a zero-sum to a non-zero-sum perspective, where mutual benefit is possible. Nature, Axelrod suggested, often acts as the banker, ensuring the game continues and allowing long-term cooperative relationships to pay off.
Okay, one last big concept, the extended phenotype. This came in a later book, but touches on ideas in the selfish gene. What's the gist?
The idea is that a gene's effects its phenotype don't have to be limited to the body it sits in.
Yeah.
Genes can exert influence outside the individual organism.
Like how?
Well, the classic example is a caddisfly larva building its protective case from stones and twigs. That case is not part of the larva's body, but its structure is clearly influenced by the larva's genes.
Ah, so the case is part of the gene's extended phenotype.
Exactly. Or think of a parasite manipulating its host's behavior, making an ant climb a grass stem so it gets eaten by a sheep, which is the parasite's next host. The ant's climbing behavior is part of the parasite's gene's extended phenotype.
Wow, that really stretches the idea of where a gene's influence ends.
It does. It reinforces the gene as the fundamental unit. Even selfish DNA just replicating within the genome could be seen as having its replication rate as its extended phenotype, or genes that cause meiotic drive biasing their own transmission during reproduction.
It also helps understand evolutionary arms races, like between cuckoos and hosts, the life dinner principle.
Yeah, the rabbit is running for its life, the fox is running for its dinner. The selection pressure is stronger on the rabbit, or the host resisting the parasite, because failure means death or total reproductive loss. Whereas the fox, or a parasite, just misses one meal or one host opportunity.
This perspective also helped explain why genes ganged up in cells and cells in bodies. Cooperation at lower levels builds the complex machinery needed for more sophisticated replication strategies.
And the bottleneck life cycle, starting from a single cell, like a fertilized egg, is crucial. It ensures all the cells in the body are genetically mostly identical, promoting cooperation within the organism and creating a unified vehicle for the genes.
That is an incredible amount to cover. Just to try and sum up, key things are this gene's eye view as the core of selection.
Yeah, the replicator focus.
The purely behavioral definition of altruism and selfishness.
Really important to remember that. No motives implied.
The logic of kin selection based on shared genes, and the potential for parent-offspring conflict.
The battles of generations and sexes stemming from genetic asymmetries.
How cooperation can evolve, like through reciprocity and strategies like tit for tat.
Nice guys can finish first.
The idea of memes as cultural replicators.
A whole other layer of evolution.
And finally, this idea of the extended phenotype, genes reaching beyond the body.
It's a really powerful framework.
Those aha moments definitely come when you suddenly see a familiar behavior animal or even human in this completely different gene-centric light. It explains things that seemed paradoxical.
It does offer compelling explanations, even if some areas are still debated. And the emergence of cooperation from simple rules is, I think, a really profound insight.
Absolutely. And it obviously raises more questions too, doesn't it? About, how this interacts with cultural evolution in humans, the ethical side of things.
Huge questions. The interplay of genes and culture is incredibly complex, and the philosophical implications are deep.
Definitely food for thought. Which leads us, I suppose, to a final thought for you, the listener. How might really internalizing this selfish gene perspective change how you view everyday human behavior? Social structures, cooperation, competition, all that stuff we navigate.
Yeah, it's a provocative lens.
And maybe the biggest question, does our conscious thought, our culture, our ability to foresee consequences, does that give us the unique ability to perhaps rebel against the dictates of our selfish genes, as Dawkins himself suggested? Can we choose to be more altruistic than our genes might naturally incline us to be?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Something to definitely ponder.